Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So, today we are going to talk about a rail from Sureshot. We read the title, we know what this is about. Look, I have been running AKs for quite a while. At this point, various lengths, various manufacturers, various countries of origin, various calibers. The thing that always kind of stands out to me about modern AK rails, we're not talking about like the Ultimac or Midwest Industries copy of that. We're talking about the extended rails made by like Troy, yet again Midwest Industries, or Zenico, who's having their own problems at the moment. And the thing about modern rails, at least to me, for the AK, especially anything that extends out, is you usually run into a few problems with them. It makes me skeptical of quite a few new rails that come out. I've already listed a few of them. Another one that comes to mind is SLR Rifle Works. A lot of times we end up fitting these into a couple of categories. Either A, it's very heavy for a nose-heavy rifle, and while the rail itself may not be real heavy, it's just not balanced correctly for the particular rifle it's being mounted to. Or B, it's really, really thin to try and preserve weight, and if you have a really thin handguard on a typically hot-running rifle anyway, you run into heat issues greater than what you would find on a regular short handguard. Or it happens to be both. For instance, Troy, I don't think has ever made anything light ever. Zenico is another example of this, because you can end up with a thin profile rail that is also heavy for no reason. So the issue that we run into here sort of compounds issues, and while you have now a capability to mount things to the rifle more easily, you're adding problems. This is one of the few times that I've run into a rail that simply does what it says on the tin without adding issues. And it does this in a not necessarily unique way, or really anything special, but it does it well. Generally speaking, when I see longer AK rails that exist on the market, I kind of shy away from it for the previous problems that I've already stated. But I figured, what the hell, let's give it a shot. As far as mounting the thing up, I sort of intentionally didn't read any instructions as far as the manual that came with it, knowing that if I screwed it up, there's an installation video that's out there and then I hadn't really paid much attention to. I also know that there's an instruction manual to undo anything that I screw up. I wanted to see if this was simple enough to rig up without looking at anything. So how long did that take to figure out? The fun fact is that it didn't take very long at all to figure out. It's simple enough to where when you see it, and you see it, the different screw lengths and that kind of stuff, and here's what's cool about this. This is intelligently designed. The different screws that go to different things are either different lengths, different sizes, and that kind of stuff. And when you're initially installing it, requiring more than one Allen key might be a pain in your ass. But what it prevents you from doing is installing the wrong screws, which I actually really do appreciate. But as far as putting it together, it's a simple collar system that hooks itself into the receiver of the rifle as a normal handguard would. And then the rail itself is more of a chassis system, which is why everyone's referencing it as a chassis, that gets fitted around that collar. What this achieves is an actual free-floated rail that you can use to install all of your junk onto. Now, in this particular instance, there are cutouts to essentially allow for the old retaining ring to stay where it's at in case people don't want to cut them off. I personally appreciate this. It allows you to do a lot more as far as just flexibility. If I decide that I don't like this or that I want to put something else on it that is of a more traditional type format, I can. What you will notice though, and we'll get more on heat later, is that as you look into the slats that allow for it, you'll notice, and it did get our attention, is that if you don't have a gloved hand and you're touching a rifle that's gotten itself pretty hot because you shot it a bunch in August, for instance, you'll notice that that retaining ring is there. This also does bleed a little more heat into the handguard, and while it isn't an enormous detriment, it is something that does exist. Now, of course, you can just cut this guy off, and there are two-piece retaining rings that do exist. But the point is the point. It's there, it allows you to keep it there, but if it is there, obviously there's a con to leaving pre-existing equipment on the gun. Another thing to note is simply sliding this over the old retaining ring requires some fandangling and wiggling, as well as a few IKEA furniture assembling cuss words. Other than that, though, it's really no big deal at all. So installation is a big plus, because you can figure it out even if you're as retarded as I am. Now let's talk about performance once it was mounted to the gun. I noticed right away that a well-used Draco, like a 12.2 Draco C, will end up with something like an 1.5-inch-ish shot group at 50, which really translates its way up to 3 plus, probably around 4 if you have a really used one. And again, this is at 100. So once everything was mounted up, and I'm just using like regular target ammunition that anybody else would. No fancy, nothing from anywhere. Right away though, I noticed that it's very AR-like in that once I started to get the thing zeroed, we had a shot group at 50 that basically touched, which is really helpful because as you back that up, what it really translates to, especially with like 30 caliber guns, is a 2-inch, slightly sub 2-inch shot group at 100, which is really helpful because getting an accuracy boost of basically 100% at that point is really helpful. In addition to this, and this is particular with this design, I know that there are further iterations of this chassis type system where you get essentially a rail dust cover and that kind of stuff, but I like this one a lot, specifically because I retain the ability to take off my dust cover if I run into a problem. Now, all guns are mortal, all guns run into stoppages, all guns run into weird stoppages. For instance, ARs can get bullet over bolt stoppages and those suck to deal with. That's occasional, that's rare, but you need to have an answer if you have that sort of issue. With AKs, a similar issue is getting a piece of brass, or in some cases I've seen an entire round, just decide that it's going to find its way into the receiver and blender itself in there. And while the gun tries to work, eventually your stuff is going to stop and you basically have to rip off the dust cover and get things cleared out. And just a thing that I've noticed with a lot of rail dust covers is either A, it's much harder to get that dust cover off, especially in a hurry and especially when your whole body's tired because you've been out training for a while, or God forbid it's an actual thing that you have to deal with in live combat. And to sit here and act like there aren't a whole lot of dudes in live combat, even from the States that are carrying around AKs right now, would be sort of a retarded thing to say. I need that dust cover to come off if I need it to come off. In addition to this, having a rail dust cover, and maybe this is just the mileage that I've got, it's never really mattered what type of system it was. If that dust cover comes off enough, that zero is going to be lost in one way or another. Either it's minor or major or minor leading to major, similar to an optic that's mounted to a 249 dust cover. You open that thing enough and you're gonna zero shift just a little bit or a lot depending on what you've got. So the fact that I can mount a dot to this, night vision equipment, put a light on it, it's all well balanced, and I can still rip off my dust cover and then put it back fairly easily is a huge plus to me personally. In addition to this, everything is pretty well balanced, especially with the extension, the added extension that you get onto the gun. Again, as previously stated, I'm not really a huge fan of a lot of modern rails that are out there, and I don't know what sort of space magic they pulled off, but in this particular case, we have a chassis system with a fatter rail on it, which boosts you away from things that are heating up. There's enough cuts in the thing to allow for greater heat dissipation and greater heat sinking, and the fact that it's free-floated really does help the fact that it can heat sink really easily, compounding the fact that now I can move stuff slightly to the rear as far as optics and that kind of stuff, so the weight distribution makes it basically go unnoticed when it's being used. And look, everybody that's run AKs for quite some time understands this. You're going to end up doing the Michael Jackson thing at least at one point because the gun's going to heat up. And if you've been going at it long enough, you get a 60 or 90 round drill and it feels like you have 140 round magazines because the drill won't end, because everything is heavier up front, everything sucks. So not feeling the difference of the rail that's attached to the gun at all, and this is from a person that's added night vision equipment to an Ultimac before, it's noticeable in that it's not noticed, if that makes any sense. In addition to this, we have a couple of little quirks here that is just stuff that I've noticed. As you can probably tell, the thing has performed quite well. I've pushed about 4,600 rounds through the gun so far with the rail attached, and I don't really have much to say in the performance side of the house, other than the fact that I can give it really, really high praise in saying it's boring and I don't have to adjust for the fact that it's there. In addition to this, especially once we got some slightly cooler weather out here, quite unlike a lot of AK builds that I've messed with in the past, the second that the overall temperature outside goes down, I'm not even concerned about heat anymore. If it weren't for the fact that reloads will carve your hands apart if you do it without gloves, I don't feel the need to wear gloves anywhere near as much as I used to before. Although I still do, because as previously stated, you do it long enough, you'll realize that AK mag catches will 100% cut you if you don't. Side note to that, no screws have come loose. I've not had to deal with any of those issues, so thankfully I don't have stuff just falling off the gun randomly as I'm running the piss out of it in drills. So a couple of minor quirks. This isn't a detriment to anything that's going on here, just stuff that I noticed. Is number one, on the underside of the gun, you can see here that AK magazines rough it up a little bit, which is true for every handguard that has ever existed ever. If you do enough training, if you do enough drills, AK magazine base plates are going to carve up a little bit of what you're using. If you have a metal handguard, the metal handguard's going to notice. If you have a wooden handguard, it's definitely going to notice. What seems to do the best in all of these regards, even though obviously it's going to get scarred up, is polymer stuff. Is this a problem? No. I'm used to little minor things here and there on AKs being a little bit sharp, and frankly, if you go outside with guns long enough, eventually you'll get to the point where everything is sharp. This is just a thing that you'll notice, no big deal. The other is that you can see a section of 1913 that overhangs your dust cover just a little bit, that you can mount optics to. The little bit of overhang, depending on what type of gassing that you've got going on with the gun or whatever, you may notice right away, just like I did, that suddenly there's slightly weird ejection happening with your AK, and you're wondering, oh my god, is the gun having a problem with this mounted or whatever? None of that is the case. All that's really happening is that it's just making a little bit of contact with this section that overhangs that. Did that cause any issues? Absolutely not. I got no stoppages from it. I just noticed, oh wow, that pooped out kind of weird, and that was basically it. Overall, what can I say about this in general? Look, frankly, a lot of people, especially in this industry, are constantly trying to say that what they've put out is something truly special because it's game-changing, or it's revolutionary, or it's going to redefine the whatever it is at whatever. And typically speaking, for the most part, except for some rare examples of pieces of equipment that actually do make changes like that, usually I look at this as, okay, what problems are you going to add that I never asked for? Typically speaking, and no one wants to admit this, good enough is actually exactly what we all are going for. Where the bar is on good enough is usually set significantly higher than places that turn out guns like PSA, Delton, the RAS 47, or the Visca, or anything built by Zastava, because their receivers are made out of cardboard. And yes, by the way, I do need to finish the PAP stuff. Obviously, the logistics chain on that changed up on us over the last couple of years, but the update is that it's not going well. Z-PAP or PAP or otherwise. And no, every time I've seen Zastava guns come through class that are 2,000 rounds or greater, there is usually some sort of issue. So I don't care how many billions of rounds you've shot through yours. These are like Magpul AK magazines. It's bad, accept that it's bad, move on from it. But typically, what good enough actually is what can do the job and what allows me the proper logistics chain and support to refit things or replace things when I need things changed for a particular mission set or when stuff breaks. And in that regard, good enough just happens to be fucking perfect. Examples of this are everywhere, like the BCM whatever it is that you have that you've refitted like 13 times. I've got more than one example of that gun hanging around right now. Or, despite how many people will sit there and try to say that Glock is obsolete, it's the Glock 19 or 17 that you just never really get away from and consistently go back to, because whatever's the latest and greatest or most revolutionary piece of equipment that just came out just happens to have some sort of quirk that pushes you back toward it. And of course, this is just a little bit of a rant because there's tons of people that say all kinds of nonsense about AKs that have the collective IQ of a garden salad and the expertise that's matched up and highlighted by saying stupid things like AK front sight towers don't adjust for windage. So with all these said, I'm gonna end this by saying just this in general. This rail is absolutely good enough. And on top of being good enough, it's boring. And that is the greatest possible compliment that I can give to a piece of equipment that you're supposed to made up other pieces of equipment that absolutely change how you do things. And that's all I can really say. Mount it up, it works, it's not 1,000 pounds, it's not gonna get to 10,000 degrees, and it sheds that heat pretty effectively. That being said, guys, if you want to support us, Links for the Patreon are absolutely going to be in the description below. If you don't want to do a monthly thing, you can 100% just throw a tiny little tip at us through the super thanks. In addition to that, if you want to get something out of supporting us, $41 a month gets you as much training as you want to personally deal with, unless it's a private class or a class that requires a mountain of logistical effort, especially now, something like a vehicle class. Everything else is essentially free game, including the night vision classes that I've scheduled. In addition to this, if you want to check out the Facebook page, yet again, all of the links for all of this stuff are in the description below, including the website that has our current listings for open enrollment classes. So if you guys want to come out and do your thing, you absolutely can do that. I know it's exhausting to sit here and listen through all of the plugs, but as the old saying goes, I don't shill, but I do have bills. So, all that said, guys, remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.
Had to find the button.